You may strike me, Prince, but do not insult the room by calling it law. Ambassador William Carter said it with blood on his lower lip, one hand resting flat on the black stone table, the other calmly folding a white pocket square as if he had just spilled coffee on himself at a hotel breakfast. 3 seconds earlier, the heir to the Aberdeen Empire had crossed the floor of the Imperial Conclave and hit the only human representative in front of 9,000 delegates and every live diplomatic feed in known space. The sound had cracked through the chamber like a judge's gavel. Then came the laughter. It rolled down from the balconies, from the armored nobles, from the polished officials in gold-threaded robes, from species that had spent the last century bowing whenever an Aberdeen warship passed within 100,000 miles of their moon. Carter did not laugh. He did not shout. He did not even touch the small cut at the corner of his mouth until the room had enjoyed itself. Then he lifted the pocket square from his jacket, pressed it once to his lip, looked at the red stain spreading across the cotton, and asked the only question that mattered. Is that an official act of your government? The laughter thinned, not because they understood, but because his tone had no fear in it. Emperor Thalvor sat above him on a throne of dark alloy, 8 feet tall, gray skin catching the cold blue light of the chamber, for amber eyes fixed on the little man below. To the emperor, Carter looked almost disappointing. A white-haired American in a plain charcoal suit, 58 years old, soft around the middle from too many embassy dinners. No armor, no ceremonial blade, no psychic shield, no honor guard worth noticing. Just a leather folder, a silver watch, and the tired patience of a man who had spent his life in rooms full of people pretending not to threaten each other. You were summoned here to hear judgment, Thalvor said, his voice deep enough to vibrate the water glasses on the diplomatic table. Not to ask questions. Carter glanced at the cameras hovering like black insects above the floor. Still recording. Good. He could feel his heart working too hard under his ribs. He could taste copper. He thought, for one sharp second, of his wife back in Virginia, standing barefoot in the kitchen at midnight, telling him not to let proud men drag decent people into war. He had promised her he would try. God help him, he was still trying. Your Majesty, Carter said, keeping his voice low, I am asking because the Treaty of Meridian makes a very clear distinction between private misconduct and state action against a protected envoy. Prince Cale gave a short, ugly laugh. Hear that? The human hides behind paperwork. No, Carter said, turning just enough to meet the prince's eyes. I am giving your father a chance to keep you alive politically. The room went quiet in pieces. First the translators, then the side conversations, then the balconies. Thalvor leaned forward, amused and offended in equal measure. You believe Earth can frighten this empire? Carter took his time putting the stained pocket square on the table. Not in his pocket. Not hidden. On the record. I believe empires usually frighten themselves, he said. They just need someone patient enough to let them finish talking. A murmur moved through the conclave. Somewhere high above, an Aberdeen advisor with silver markings along his jaw stopped smiling. Carter noticed. He always noticed the first person in a room smart enough to be afraid. Thalvor raised one hand, and the chamber stilled completely. Then hear me clearly, human. The hand that struck you was the hand of the Empire. Your colonies sit on our border. Your species has mistaken tolerance for permission. You will kneel, apologize, and accept Aberdeen supervision, or Earth will learn its place. Carter closed his folder. For the first time since the prince hit him, his expression changed. Not much. Just a small settling around the eyes. The look of a man watching a bridge burn after warning everyone not to smoke near the gasoline. He tapped his watch once, opened a secure channel buried beneath 4 layers of diplomatic encryption, and sent 6 words to Seoul. Article 9 confirmed. Public record intact. Then William Carter looked up at the emperor who thought he had just humiliated one old man, and said, I need 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Prince Cale repeated, smiling like he had just found a small animal under his boot. You ask for time after being corrected in front of the galaxy? Ambassador William Carter looked at him for a long second, then adjusted the cuff of his left sleeve because the prince had wrinkled it when he grabbed him. It was such a small, ordinary movement that it irritated the entire room more than any insult could have. Carter had learned that years ago in Washington, then Geneva, then on the first orbital embassy above Mars. Loud men wanted loud enemies. They wanted shouting, shaking hands, wounded pride, something they could point at and call instability. He had survived better rooms than this by giving them nothing they could use. I asked for 12 minutes, Carter said. Not forgiveness. The Emperor rested one clawed hand on the arm of his throne. And what do you imagine will happen in 12 minutes, Ambassador? Carter opened his leather folder again and removed a cream-colored copy of the Treaty of Meridian. Real paper. Human paper. The kind diplomats carried when they wanted everyone in the room to understand that history was heavier than a data file. In 12 minutes, your own recording clerks will finish entering your statement into the official conclave archive. Once that happens, no one can edit the context, soften the wording, or blame a translation error. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Carter heard it, the quiet scrape of unease moving through 1,000 different species at once. Thalvor heard it too, and his upper eyes narrowed. You think procedure protects you? Carter almost laughed, but he was too tired for that. His jaw ached. His lips stung. Under the table, his right hand had a small tremor he did not let anyone see. He was not made of steel. He was a grandfather with a bad knee, a cholesterol problem, and a picture of his daughter tucked behind his diplomatic badge because she still rolled her eyes when he called her kiddo. He did not want a war named after him. He did not want schoolchildren on Earth learning about the day William Carter failed to keep the peace. But peace had rules. If no one defended them, they were only decorations. Procedure does not protect me, Carter said. It tells everyone who removed the protection first. Prince Kale stepped closer, trying to crowd him, trying to make the smaller human lean back. Carter did not. He could smell the prince's ceremonial oils, sharp and metallic, like rain on hot pavement. You are alone here, Kale said. No fleet, no soldiers, no rescue. Carter looked past him at the high glass ceiling, beyond it to the stars smeared white by the orbital shields of the Aberdeen capital. Somewhere far away, past black space and cold math, Earth had received his message. Maybe General Marcus Reed was reading it now. Maybe some young officer under Washington was turning a key she had prayed she would never touch. Carter hoped they were calm. He hoped they remembered the order of operations. Evidence first. Evacuation second. Containment third. Fire only if fired upon. Humanity had built those rules after learning exactly how ugly it could become without them. I know I am alone, Carter said softly. That is why I am being careful. Thalvor leaned back, satisfied in the wrong way. To him, caution sounded like fear. Restraint sounded like weakness. The Emperor lifted his chin toward the recording dais. Let the archive show that Earth was warned. Let the archive show that its envoy refused mercy when offered. Let the archive show that the Aberdeen Empire acted with lawful authority. Carter watched the lead clerk press 3 glowing fingers to the seal pad. The official record turned from amber to white. Locked. Carter breathed in through his nose, slow and steady, the way his wife had taught him when his temper got close to the surface. Then he placed one finger on the treaty, not dramatically, not hard, just enough to mark the line. Thank you, he said. The Emperor frowned. For what? Carter checked his watch. 11 minutes and 58 seconds had passed. For putting it in writing. The Emperor stared at Carter as if the human had spoken in a language too small to respect. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The archive seal glowed white above the conclave floor, bright and final, and Carter could feel the mood in the room changing by inches. Not fear yet. Fear would come later. This was confusion, and confusion was useful. Prince Kale looked from the sealed record to his father, then back to Carter. You are proud of a clerk's stamp? Carter folded the treaty, closed with both hands. No, Your Highness. I am relieved your government still values documentation. A few nervous laughs fluttered through the lower galleries, then died when Thalvor did not join them. Carter reached for the water glass in front of him. His fingers were steady now, mostly because he had something to do with them. He took one careful sip, felt the cold water sting his lip, and set the glass down exactly where it had been. Before we continue, he said, I request that the conclave medical officer note my condition for the record. Kale barked out a laugh. You want a nurse? I want accuracy. Carter looked up at the nearest recording drone. A protected envoy was struck during a formal session. No further injury has occurred. No weapon has been drawn by Earth. No threat has been issued by Earth. Please enter that. The lead clerk hesitated. His long fingers hovered above the console. Thalvor gave a lazy wave, annoyed but amused. Enter it. Let history record the human whining in perfect detail. The clerk obeyed. Carter nodded once. Thank you. That politeness bothered them more than anger would have. It bothered Cale most of all. The prince wanted the little man to shake. He wanted tears, outrage, anything hot enough to justify the story he had already told himself. But Carter only opened his folder again and removed a second page. This one was not from the Treaty of Meridian. It was a list. Names of Aberdeen border actions, dates, colony coordinates, missing cargo ships, detained workers, unanswered complaints. Years of small cuts. Years of Earth swallowing pride because the alternative would cost too much. Carter had signed some of those letters himself. He remembered the late nights, the cheap coffee, the young embassy staffer from Ohio, crying in the hallway after notifying a family that their son had vanished in Aberdeen space. He remembered telling her to keep her voice calm, because calm was what kept doors open. Now those doors were closing. Your Majesty, Carter said, for the sake of every civilian on both sides, I am asking one final time. Classify the prince's conduct as personal misconduct. Withdraw the claim over our colonies. Allow a neutral review. Thalvor smiled slowly. No. Carter looked tired when he heard it. Not defeated. Just tired in the way a man looks when the last easy option has been thrown away by someone else. Then I have nothing more to offer you in this room. Far from the conclave, buried beneath 300 feet of reinforced concrete outside Washington, General Marcus Reed stood in front of a dark tactical wall as Carter's packet arrived through the quantum relay. Article 9 confirmed. Public record intact. Medical condition logged. State responsibility affirmed. Reed read it twice. He was 61, broad-shouldered, with the flat expression of a man who hated dramatic moments because dramatic moments usually meant somebody younger would pay for them. A colonel beside him whispered, "Sir?" Reed did not answer right away. He looked at the wall, where the Aberdeen Empire glowed red across 12 disputed systems. Then he said, very quietly, "Begin civilian evacuation from New Aberdeen. Wake the quiet fleet. No speeches. No leaks. No heroics." Back in the conclave, Carter checked his watch again. Somewhere, under the polished arrogance of an empire, the first hidden locks were beginning to turn. The conclave did not explode into panic. That would have been easier for Emperor Thalvor to understand. Panic had shape. Panic had noise. What filled the chamber instead was something thinner and colder, the slow discomfort of thousands of witnesses realizing they had been laughing at the wrong part of the story. Carter remained seated at the black stone table, his stained pocket square placed neatly beside the treaty, his hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for a city council meeting to resume. Prince Cale paced near him, restless and irritated, because the human had turned humiliation into paperwork and somehow made the paperwork feel dangerous. "Look at him," Cale said, lifting his voice for the galleries. "Earth sends an old man with a folder, and he thinks silence makes him strong." Carter did not answer right away. He looked down at the table and noticed a small scratch in the polished stone, probably from some earlier ceremony where another frightened world had signed away its future. He wondered how many ambassadors had sat where he was sitting and told themselves they could still salvage something. A port, a moon, a few thousand lives, a little dignity. Diplomacy was not about winning clean. Most days it was about losing slowly enough that families could sleep through the night. Carter knew that better than anyone in the room. That was why his voice stayed quiet when he finally spoke. "Your Highness, silence does not make a man strong. It gives him time to decide whether speaking is worth the damage." Cale stopped pacing. "You are threatening me again." "No," Carter said. "I am correcting you again." A ripple moved through the chamber. Not laughter this time. Something closer to a held breath. Above them, the recording drones adjusted their lenses. Every network from the inner systems to the outer trade lanes was still carrying the feed, and Carter knew millions of ordinary people were watching from kitchens, cargo decks, school domes, repair bays, places where politics usually felt far away until it landed on their doorstep. He also knew Earth was watching. His daughter might be watching. That thought hit harder than the prince had. Carter kept his face still. Emperor Thalvor noticed the silence in the galleries and disliked it. He rose from his throne, towering beneath the blue-white lights. "Enough. Ambassador Carter, you have been granted patience beyond your value. You will stand, bow to this court, and state that Earth accepts Aberdeen supervision over New Aberdeen, Marlowe's Reach, and the other disputed colonies. You will do this now. Carter lifted his eyes. I cannot do that. You can, or your people will suffer the consequences of your pride. For the first time, Carter's jaw tightened. Not much. Just enough for the closest delegates to see there was a man under the suit, and that the man was tired of being careful for people who mistook care for cowardice. This is not pride, Carter said. Pride is hitting a diplomat because you believe cameras make cruelty look like strength. Pride is calling civilians trespassers because your map is older than their homes. Pride is thinking an empire can put its hand on a stove and blame the fire for being hot. Prince Kale's face darkened. Father, end this. Thalvor looked down at Carter with cold satisfaction. Very well. Let the conclave hear the empire's final position. The prince acted with my authority. The demand over the colonies stands. If Earth resists, the empire will respond as it has always responded. Carter closed his eyes for half a second. In that small darkness, he saw Virginia Rain on the kitchen window, his wife holding a coffee mug with both hands, his daughter laughing at him for wearing dress shoes to a backyard barbecue. He had spent his whole life trying to keep worlds from reaching this point. Then he opened his eyes, and the tiredness was still there, but the hesitation was gone. Then the record is complete, he said. Thalvor frowned. What record? Carter picked up the pocket square, folded the red stain inward, and placed it inside the treaty folder like evidence going into a case file. The one your grandchildren will wish you had read before today. Carter's words did not land like a threat. They landed like a receipt. That was what made Thalvor hate them. The Emperor had expected fire from the human by now, some ugly outburst he could feed to the conclave as proof that Earth was unstable, emotional, unfit to stand beside older powers. Instead, Carter kept giving him dates, clauses, witness statements, and that worn-out look Americans got when a meeting had run too long and everyone in the room knew the boss was making a bad decision. You speak of grandchildren as if your species has a future to discuss, Thalvor said. Carter placed both hands on the table and stood slowly. His knee complained, a sharp little reminder that he was still just a man in his late 50s, not some myth carved out of a recruiting poster. He could feel the whole chamber watching him now. He could feel Earth on the other end of the silence. Your Majesty, he said, I have spent 30 years asking my people to be patient with yours. Kale rolled his eyes. How generous. Carter looked at him, and for the first time, there was something like pity in his face. No, son. Not generous. Difficult. The prince stiffened at being called son, but Carter continued before pride could interrupt him. Patience is not natural for us. We are not good at watching bullies push people around and pretending it is cultural tradition. We are not good at seeing families removed from homes and calling it border management. We are not good at swallowing insult after insult because some council chamber has nice lighting and expensive chairs. The gallery stayed quiet. Even the delegates who hated Earth were listening now because the old man was no longer defending himself. He was explaining a door they had never noticed. Far away, beneath Washington, the door had already opened. General Marcus Reed stood in the command center as old sections of the tactical wall came alive one by one. Not bright red, not dramatic, just clean white icons appearing in places acrid in maps marked as empty space. Europa Drydock, Titan Reserve, the Far Jupiter listening net. The civilian evacuation from New Aberdeen was already moving under the cover of a scheduled cargo drill. Families were being woken gently. Children were being told to bring one backpack. Pets were being loaded first because somebody at Earth Command had remembered that frightened kids followed frightened animals better than orders. A young officer looked up from her console. General, no public response from the president yet. Reed nodded. Good. The Empire will read that as weakness. Let them. Back in the conclave, Thalvor received a message from one of his fleet marshals and smiled, as if the universe had just confirmed his opinion. Your Earth is quiet, Ambassador. Carter did not look surprised. Yes. No protests. No emergency broadcast. No fleet movement visible from our long-range arrays. That sounds accurate. Thalvor leaned forward. They have abandoned you. Carter thought of his wife again, not as a memory this time, but as a person likely standing in their living room with one hand over her mouth, understanding him better than anyone in this room ever could. She would know exactly why Earth had not shouted. She had lived with him long enough to know that the most dangerous decisions in human history were often made in quiet rooms by exhausted people trying not to make them. Carter lowered his voice. "No, Your Majesty. Earth is counting." Kale laughed once, but it came out thinner than before. "Counting what?" Carter looked up at the live feed screens, at the bright imperial banners, at the faces of conquered worlds pretending not to hope. Ships, civilians, treaty violations, distance to your border fleet. Time until your admirals make the mistake you trained them to make. Thalvor's smile faded. Carter closed the folder under his arm and added, almost gently, "You thought silence meant we had nothing to say. That was never what our silence meant." The mistake came from Marshal Vorik, exactly the kind of man Carter had expected the Empire to produce. Vorik was not reckless in the way young officers were reckless. He was worse. He was experienced, decorated, and completely convinced that experience with weaker species counted as wisdom. His flagship, the Crown of Ash, dropped from slip space at the edge of the new Aberdeen system with 47 Imperial vessels behind it, each one painted in the black and gold of Aberdeen authority. On the command deck, Vorik studied the human colony through a curved wall of glass. New Aberdeen looked small from orbit, a scatter of warm lights tucked between gray mountains and a cold northern ocean. 12,000 people, maybe less. A school dome near the river. 2 hospitals. Cargo fields. Greenhouses. Nothing that looked like a fortress. Nothing that looked worthy of fear. "This is the colony that concerns them?" one of his officers asked. Vorik gave a dry click of amusement. "Humans name barns and call them worlds." A junior sensor aide hesitated near the rear console. "Marshal, the traffic records show unusual civilian movement in the last hour. Shuttles departing from the southern districts. Surface power usage is dropping in a controlled sequence." Vorik did not turn around. "Panic. It appears organized, sir." "Then they are organized cowards." He pointed toward the main display, where an old orbital beacon blinked beside the colony approach lane. It broadcast in plain Galactic Standard and American English, the message repeating every 15 seconds. "You are entering a protected civilian corridor. Turn back." The bridge crew laughed because it sounded so polite. That was the problem with the Aberdeen Empire. It had conquered so many frightened worlds that it had forgotten the difference between politeness and pleading. Vorik leaned back in his command chair. "Ignore the sign." Back in the Imperial Conclave, the same beacon feed appeared on a side screen. Thalvor watched it with renewed confidence. Prince Kale smiled for the cameras again, trying to recover the easy cruelty that had slipped from his face. "There," Kale said. "Your colony begs." Carter looked at the little warning on the screen, and something inside him tightened. He knew New Aberdeen. He had eaten terrible blueberry pie there during a trade visit 5 years earlier. He remembered a diner owner named Marcy who had insisted that no ambassador should leave without a second slice. He remembered kids waving paper flags at the shuttle pad because children on frontier worlds still thought visitors from Earth were exciting. Those people were not chess pieces to him. That was what the Empire never understood. Human restraint did not come from distance. It came from remembering faces. "They are not begging," Carter said. "They are being decent enough to warn you." Thalvor made a dismissive sound. On the screen, the Aberdeen fleet crossed the beacon line. For 1 second, nothing happened. Kale spread his hands as if making a point. Then every Imperial vessel stopped moving. Not slowed. Stopped. The command deck of the Crown of Ash lurched as the artificial gravity compensated too late, and every navigation display filled with calm white text. "Transit lock engaged. Weapons safed. External control handshake complete." Vorik shot upright. "Who accessed my ship?" The junior aide stared at his console, voice suddenly small. "Marshal, the beacon was not a beacon." Around New Aberdeen, empty space changed. Stars bent at the edges as hidden gravity anchors woke from low-power drift. Containers registered as farm equipment opened into command relays. Mining satellites unfolded sensor arrays. And beyond the outer moon, where Imperial charts showed nothing but dust, the first ships of the quiet fleet appeared without ceremony, dark, angular, and close enough that they had been waiting the whole time. In the conclave, the laughter died all at once. Carter did not smile. He only looked at Emperor Thalvor and said, "That was the mistake your admirals were trained to make." Marshal Vorik tried to give the order anyway. That was the second thing Carter had expected. Proud officers did not usually accept locked doors the first time they pulled the handle. On the crown of ash, Vorik gripped the arms of his command chair hard enough for the metal to complain and shouted, "Fire main batteries." The weapons officer moved fast, for hands sliding across the console in trained sequence. Nothing answered. No charging hum. No status tone. No angry red warning. Just the same calm white text sitting on every screen like a polite note from a mechanic. Weapons safed under civilian corridor authority. Vorik stared at it. Override. I am trying, Marshal. Try harder. The officer swallowed. The ship believes we are in a restricted humanitarian lane. Vorik turned slowly. The ship believes? Before anyone could answer, every speaker on every Aberdeen bridge opened at once, and a woman with a flat Midwestern voice spoke in clean Galactic Standard. This is Commander Rachel Kim of the United Earth Quiet Fleet. You have crossed into a protected civilian corridor after receiving a lawful warning. Power down your drives and prepare for inspection. No harm will come to your crews if you comply. The message repeated in Aberdeen, then in English, then in the old trade dialects of the border systems. In the conclave, it played through the main hall with no music, no dramatic thunder, no speech about vengeance. That made it worse. It sounded like an airport announcement. Carter watched the Emperor listen to it, and he saw the first real crack in Thalvor's certainty. Not fear yet. Not enough. But a question had entered the Emperor's mind, and questions were how arrogance started to bleed air. Prince Kale pointed at the screen. They are bluffing. Carter looked at him. No, Your Highness. A bluff is when you want the other side to guess. Commander Kim is explaining the process. Kale's mouth opened, but no answer came. Around New Aberdeen, the quiet fleet held position with an ugly kind of patience. The ships did not look like imperial vessels. No banners. No gold hulls. No bright ceremonial markings. They were dark gray, blunt, practical, built by people who cared more about surviving the trip than impressing anybody watching. One of them drifted close enough to the crown of ash for Vorik to see its name painted in small white letters along the hull. UES Harriet Tubman. He did not know the name. That was another failure of imperial education. Marshal, the junior censor aide said, voice shaking. More contacts are appearing. How many? I do not know how to count them, sir. In Washington, General Marcus Reed stood with one hand resting on the back of an empty chair. He was not smiling either. Nobody in the room was. The officers were calm, but it was the hard calm of firefighters walking toward smoke because the job had found them again. A communications lieutenant looked up. Commander Kim reports full lock. Aberdeen weapons remain safe. New Aberdeen evacuation is at 92%. Reed nodded. Keep the lane open until every civilian shuttle clears atmosphere. And if Vorik finds a manual workaround. Reed looked at the tactical wall, at the little blue lights lifting off from New Aberdeen one after another. Then we remind him that the warning was not decorative. Back in the conclave, Thalvor stood so abruptly that the floating throne platform dipped beneath his weight. This is an act of war. Carter turned his head slowly, as if the sentence disappointed him more than it angered him. No, Your Majesty. This is restraint. The Emperor's 4 eyes burned. You disable my fleet and call it restraint? Yes, Carter said, because they are still breathing. Their ships are still intact. Their families will still hear from them tonight if you stop teaching them that pride is worth dying for. The chamber went silent in a way Carter had never heard before. Not the silence after insult. Not the silence before judgment. This was the silence of powerful people realizing that the small man in the plain suit had not been asking for mercy from them. He had been offering it to them. Thalvor did not sit back down. For the first time since the session began, he looked less like a monument and more like a ruler doing math faster than his pride could tolerate. 47 ships trapped at New Aberdeen. Civilian evacuation nearly complete. The live feed still running. Every word sealed in the conclave archive. Every smaller world in the chamber watching to see whether the Empire could still make the room obey. Prince Kale saw it too, and panic made him crueler. Seize him. Kale snapped, pointing at Carter. Take the human off the floor. The royal guards moved at once, tall Aberdeen soldiers in black ceremonial armor, their steps heavy enough to tremble the glassware on the table. Carter did not move. He did not reach for anything. He did not even look at the guards. He looked at the Emperor, because the final decision still belonged to him. Your Majesty, Carter said, I strongly recommend you do not do that. Cale laughed, too loud. You recommend? Carter nodded. Professionally. The guards reached the inner ring. Then the conclave lights cut from blue to deep red. Every door around the chamber sealed with a low mechanical thud. The floating camera drones froze in place, then pivoted away from Carter and toward the imperial throne. High above, the great archive seal flashed 3 times and projected a new line across the central display. Emergency diplomatic hostage protocol activated. External witness network engaged. For one long second, nobody breathed. Carter looked almost embarrassed by it, like a man whose phone had rung during church. For the record, he said, that was automatic. Thalvor's voice dropped. You took control of my chamber. No, Carter said. Your chamber responded to your treaty. Article 9, subsection 12. If a protected envoy is threatened with detention after a confirmed state action, neutral systems preserve the witness record until review. A nervous delegate from a water world in the lower tier whispered, we signed that. Another voice answered, we all did. The royal guard stopped walking. They were brave men, Carter could see that. Not monsters. Not fools. Just soldiers suddenly asked to step into a legal machine their emperor had forgotten existed. One of them looked up at Thalvor, waiting for an order that would make sense. None came. On the main display, Commander Rachel Kim's feet expanded. The Aberdeen fleet at New Aberdeen floated inside the silent grip of the quiet fleet. Shuttles continued to lift from the colony's surface, small blue lights climbing towards safe corridors. No explosions. No firestorm. No victory music. Just evacuation routes, disabled weapons, and human ships holding the line with patient, unglamorous discipline. Carter watched one shuttle clear the upper atmosphere and felt a weight loosen in his chest. Not all of it. Never all of it. But enough to let him breathe. Those were families. Lunchboxes left on counters. Dogs confused by emergency carriers. Parents pretending their voices were steady. That was what this had always been about. Not flags. Not pride. Not the emperor's wounded theater. People getting one more night because somebody had built rules and somebody else had the nerve to enforce them. Thalvor turned from the screen to Carter. You are not a diplomat. Carter gave him a tired look. That is where you are wrong. Cale stepped back, suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. Carter picked up his leather folder and held it at his side. His lip had stopped bleeding, but the stain remained tucked inside the treaty, a quiet little piece of history. A diplomat is not a weak soldier, Your Majesty, Carter said. A diplomat is what we send before the soldiers. The words carried through the conclave without echo. They did not need one. Around the chamber, delegates who had spent decades lowering their eyes before Aberdeen banners began looking directly at the throne. That was when Thalvor understood the real damage. Earth had not just stopped his fleet. Earth had shown every frightened world in the room that the Empire could be stopped. For several seconds, the Empire had no language left. That was the strangest part to Carter. A room built to turn power into ceremony, law into theater, and fear into obedience suddenly became just a room full of living beings trying to understand what had changed. Emperor Thalvor stood above them, still enormous, still crowned, still surrounded by banners and guards. But the old spell around him had cracked. Carter could see it in the faces below. A trade minister from a mining moon sat up straighter. A priestess from a conquered border world stopped hiding her hands inside her sleeves. Even the Aberdeen guards looked at the floor instead of the throne, as if they had just remembered that uniforms did not make choices disappear. Carter opened his folder one last time and removed a final document. Not a threat. Not a surrender demand written in the language of revenge. A settlement framework, dated 3 months earlier, prepared by people on Earth who had hoped it would never be needed. These are the terms, Carter said. His voice was rough now, not from fear, but from the weight of staying calm longer than a man should have to. Your fleet at New Aberdeen powers down completely and accepts neutral inspection. All civilians in the disputed colonies remain under Earth protection. The prince will face public review under conclave law. Border claims will be suspended pending arbitration. Any member world held by coercive treaty may request independent status without imperial interference. Prince Cale stared at him. You expect us to accept humiliation? Carter looked at the young prince, and for a moment he did not see an enemy. He saw a spoiled son raised inside applause, taught that respect was something taken from people who could not afford to refuse. That kind of upbringing was a tragedy too, just not an excuse. No, Carter said. I expect you to survive it. Falvor slowly lowered himself back onto the throne. He looked older now. Not weaker, exactly, but less certain that strength was the same thing as control. On the screen, the last evacuation shuttle cleared New Aberdeen and entered the protected lane. Commander Rachel Kim's voice came through the chamber, calm as ever. All civilians accounted for. Quiet fleet holding position. In Washington, General Reed heard the same report and closed his eyes for 1 second. Around him, nobody cheered. They had not done something joyful. They had done something necessary, and necessary things often left a bruise. In the conclave, Falvor took the settlement with a hand that did not shake, though everyone watched as if it might. If I sign this, the galaxy will think the Empire bent to Earth. Carter slid his pen across the table. No, Your Majesty. The galaxy will think the Empire learned the difference between being powerful and being reckless. The Emperor looked at the pen for a long time. Then he signed. No thunder followed. No grand speech. Just ink on paper, a small sound in a massive hall. But across the chamber, delegates who had once believed nothing could stand in front of the Aberdeen machine began quietly sending messages home. Not declarations. Not celebrations. Just the first careful words of people remembering they still had a future. Carter gathered his papers. As he turned to leave, Falvor spoke behind him. Ambassador, why did you not destroy my fleet when you had the chance? Carter stopped at the edge of the floor. His lip still hurt. His knee hurt. His heart hurt in a quieter place, thinking of all the families who would wake tomorrow knowing how close the dark had come. Because restraint is not weakness, he said. It is what decent people use when they are strong enough to choose. Then William Carter walked out beneath the silent cameras, an old man in a wrinkled suit carrying a stained pocket square and a treaty folder. And for years afterward, when young diplomats across the galaxy studied that day, their teachers did not tell them Earth had won because it had the bigger fleet. They told them Earth had won because one tired human remembered that the line between peace and war is not drawn by the cruel. It is held by the patient, the careful, and the brave enough to stay calm when everyone else mistakes mercy for fear.